Well, hello YouTube, it's me, Fortmaster, and welcome back to another Dorked reaction. And this one is Ralsei and the player's concerning relationship. Yeah, Ralsei's connection to Kris is, well, odd when you think about it. I mean, one, he looks like what I would presume to be a young version of his big brother, Azriel. Then there's the... is it one or two times, I'm forgetting which, where like the camera will pan to somebody else, like at the insistence of Ralsei saying, oh, what do you think they're doing right now, or something to that matter. And when the camera comes back, you'll catch like the end of a conversation that Ralsei is having with Kris, the character. So, like, how all of this goes in, and whether it's like the whole thing where Ralsei is secretly like the main villain behind all of this or something, no idea, because there's obviously something going on here that we, the player, are not privy to at the moment, and it's kind of freaky. And it's one of those things where, like, the longer you think of it, the more you bang your head against the wall, just begging Toby to finally release the next chapter. So without further ado, of course, as always, original video is linked in the description if you haven't seen it for some reason. Corner video will lead to my Let's Play of the day, and with all that out of the way, let's get this thing actually started then, shall we?
Ralsei is a character shrouded in mystery and intrigue, and quite a bit of discourse and debate. Is he evil?
Yeah.
Is he Azriel? Does he represent Kris's desire to blend in with monster society? What are his intentions, and what is he? I do hope to do a deeper analysis of him in the near future, but such an undertaking is going to require a few replays to really get everything fresh in my mind. In the meantime, I'd like to touch on one specific scene that I think has interesting implications about Ralsei and his relationship with the player, the acid tunnel of love. This scene gives us some quiet introspection about Ralsei as a character. As the boat sails down the acid stream, he opens up by stating how nice it is to spend some time alone with Kris, all while blushing. If you choose the positive, affirming choices, like I feel the same, not only does he blush more intensely, but he faces the camera, very thankful for the gesture. He of course opens up about his insecurities, about his desire to make a good impression. He reveals that the reason he hid his face beneath a hood and then his hat was because of his shyness. He didn't know much about friendship, having lived such a lonely life. He assumed kindness was all it took, which was why Susie's brash behaviors in Chapter 1 confounded his mind. She went off his perceived script about how a hero was supposed to act. But through meeting Kris and Susie, Ralsei started to learn that friendship is more nuanced than just an endless sea of positivity. Where before he berated Susie's actions, he now accepts that even her faults are a part of what makes her unique, and they should be embraced. And of course, he compliments Kris as well, though this unfortunately has uncomfortable implications when you consider that Kris is not in full control of their choices, and that Ralsei likely knows this. It comes across perhaps as slightly condescending when you consider, too, that he's repeatedly said that Kris's choices matter, that Kris should be the one giving the party direction in battle until Susie defied this idea in the Sweet Cap and Cakes fight, and all the times we cut back to him going, "That's why, Kris." With Ralsei facing the camera, the question becomes, is he really talking to Kris, or is he talking to us? Sure, he eventually turns to Kris again, likely to maintain the illusion that he is talking to them instead of us, but for that brief moment, he faces the fourth wall and acknowledges our choice. This isn't the first time I've pondered this, because Ralsei seems very set on ensuring that we have a good time. When other characters like Susie say that our choices don't matter, Ralsei is very adamant that they do, even if they aren't the choices he would agree with, like fighting Darkners instead of befriending and recruiting them.
Yeah.
And it's interesting, because when Susie attacks Darkners in the first chapter, Ralsei gets upset. While he discourages violence at the start of Chapter 1, he won't complain if you're the one attacking Darkners, at least not nearly to the same degree as Susie, and I think that's because he holds us in such high regard. He doesn't want us to feel like we're making bad choices. He wants us to enjoy the adventure, no matter what path we walk, and while he'll provide guidance, he'll never dominate.
Yeah, that is the thing. I mean, I've heard a couple of theories, like, all of this, it just saying, oh, your choices matter when Ralsei's talking to us instead of to Kris, who we are, not most likely, we are controlling. At least that's the theory. Again, there's the whole, like, possible other thing where there's something else in Kris and that's ripped out their soul or, you know, something of that matter. But still, Ralsei is almost is weirdly obsessed with us, us, the player, it seems almost. Because I mean, so if the whole thing where it's that's why Kris, they could literally be trying to explain to Kris why they need to let us stay in control, or something like that. Ralsei being the only person seemingly to know where they are. Going back to the whole thing where I did a reaction to the first part of the device theory, and the thought of Ralsei being potentially self-aware and knowing that they're in a program, so to speak. I mean, it could be on the other hand, it could also literally be that they just want to prolong their own existence for as long as possible, because as long as we're having a good time, we're continuing to play a game, and the game is still running, and they still get to exist as a result. So, I mean, there is that as well.
Now, looping back to the acid tunnel, if you tell him that it's nice that Ralsei is Ralsei, he's shocked and flattered. No one's ever told him his identity matters. His stammering shows how flustered this makes him, and when he admits hearing it from Kris is especially meaningful, I find myself once again questioning if it's because Kris said it, or if it's because we made them say it. Regardless, he doesn't really know what being Ralsei-like means, which sheds some mysterious light on what he represents, especially if you read Ralsei as analogous to the kind of being Kris wishes they were, that is, a boss monster that looks like their family, and is polite and friendly and generally does what they're told. Then where is Ralsei's agency and individuality? There's a pretty cool video on this symbolic reading of Ralsei by Shadow of Roserade, which I'll link in the description.
I think I remember hearing about that. I'm gonna have to check that one out later.
It's a pretty fun spin on the Ralsei as Kris's ideal self theory, as it paints Ralsei less as Kris's literal persona and more of a representation of their own insecurities when compared to their family and their peers. But while this is all enlightening in its own way, it's what happens when you do not affirm Ralsei in the scene that really intrigues me. Because on its own, Ralsei facing the screen could be chalked up to him being so bashful he turns away from Kris and just happens to be facing towards us.
Yeah?
But if you instead say that it's strange that he's enjoying the solo time, Ralsei faces away from the screen, looking up instead. He fumbles his words, claims it's sarcasm, and even turns his back on Kris on a few subsequent lines. If you choose silence at the next choice, he then claims it's like Kris to be quiet, goes off on this tangent about Kris being you-like, and says, "I guess I like you-like things." This once again shows an eagerness to please, to take the cold shoulder with stride and play it off as something warm and good. Ralsei really does not want to challenge our choices, even if they are not the things he wants to hear. No, not at all.
It's kind of creepy.
His whole spiel about serving lighteners in Chapter 1 also similarly paints him in a worrying light. But while the quiet response is perhaps more in character for Kris, it's sobering that Kris is not the one choosing to behave this way. So even when we act in a way that's in character, Kris does not make the direct inputs. While they have some moments of independent action in both chapters, and especially during Chapter 2, and they can even influence how they say and carry out the choices we make for them, their influence remains limited. They might reply with more or less enthusiasm on certain choices, which tells us how they would actually feel, or slump in disappointment when they can't reach the arcade controls, or pose dramatically with their friends when they reunite in Cyberfield. And back towards Noelle when Queen approaches her at one point. There's a lot of little gestures that show their true character, even in the boundaries of our choices, but it's still not true freedom.
No,
not really. Though it is worth noting that the room in Castletown is made with Kris in mind, complete with all the trophies and accolades their brother has, moss in the corner to snack on, and a wardrobe with whatever they could want to wear. Ralsei also brings up Kris's skill with video games by the arcade machine. With this in mind, it's safe to say that Ralsei is aware of Kris's true interests and isn't completely using them as a vehicle to speak to us. However, even with the most optimistic reading, I still genuinely feel that Ralsei values us over Kris, and nearly everything he says to Kris is meant for players instead. He's one of the few characters to directly acknowledge the game mechanics, and by far the one who does it the most.
Yeah,
Kris
definitely.
has the instruction manual. While it's never directly readable in-game, there are unused files that show the manual's contents. These contents include the game controls, menu and battle mechanics, and are directed at us, the player, more so than Kris. But it's not just those unused images.
Yeah, I think I remember looking at that once. It's the fact that it's written by Ralsei.
The training dummy tutorial contains many direct references to the game mechanics, from a direct callback to Flowey's tutorial at the start of Undertale to describing the attack reticle, buttons, and menu options. You can get a lot of this by screwing around in the battle rather than following Ralsei's instructions. And what's interesting here is that even if you frustrate him by going against his orders, he takes it all rather passively, getting clearly uncomfortable yet not wanting to be too pushy. Attacking the dummy makes him uneasy since it looks so much like him, but then he offers to let you hurt him if it'll make you feel better, which, again, super concerning.
Yeah, that's not healthy. That's not any healthy at all. It's, rather creepy, actually.
He only calls off the tutorial once it's clear the dummy could break, and then apologizes for being a bad teacher. And if you screw around with the other commands, he gets increasingly exasperated, but tries to remain patient and friendly throughout, giving hints and guidance until he decides it's gone on long enough. As annoyed as he might get, he always tries to be pleasant and patient with us, even if it upsets him. If you throw away the manual, he picks it back up at first, and if you do it again, he lets it slide and says he'll make a new and better manual. In Chapter 2, he'll even give you a trash can to throw away more manuals in the future. And while it's good that he repeatedly will encourage you to spare and be kind to enemies, if you act disinterested in this, he doesn't push it and instead states that whatever you want to do will make him happy. Heck, with recruitment, he even acknowledges that breaking bonds by fighting can instead make you stronger, which is an odd thing to mention if he's wholly opposed to following that path. When it comes to us, he'll give suggestions, but generally defer to our personal choices in the end, almost sugarcoating everything to Kris. Really, Ralsei only starts truly freaking out at our choices and actions in the weird route when Kris just won't give us the chance to shift our perspective to Susie and Noelle. Ralsei starts freaking out, acting like this isn't what's meant to happen. It's something off script, and that scares him. And it seems following the prophecy and a preset path is really important to Ralsei. He's waited his entire life for Kris and Susie to carry it out. He says their journey will be exactly as the prophecy foretold at the start of Chapter 1. Half of why he gets so frustrated with Susie is because she doesn't want to fulfill the role he believes she's meant to.
Yeah.
If you look at Ralsei as a character who's aware that he's in a video game and is aware of the fourth wall, then this double standard with Susie makes a little bit more sense, because Susie is simply a character in the story, a party member, not the protagonist, whereas Kris is the vessel from which we, the player, engage with the world, and thus our choices are more real. And
Again, the whole thing, it is, that goes back to what I said before, but the whole thing about, like, well, Ralsei did say he's been waiting his entire life, so the whole thing of, like, wanting the game to go along so that he can still keep existing if his existence is tied to the player actually playing the game. But also, the idea that, like, for lack of a better term, Ralsei is, like, racist or something, treating, like, everybody else like they're a second-class citizen just because they're not the player. That's messed up and kind of funny at the same time.
I think that when we cut to Susie's perspective, that is also for our benefit, so that we get a fuller view of the story, while he can also talk to Kris and give them those mysterious "that's why" statements I already mentioned. We don't yet know what this means, but if I had to guess, he's trying to convince Kris that they have to go along with us, that this is their role, that it's okay, and that it's all part of the plan. After all, Castletown is named after our player name, and since the town formed around Ralsei's castle, it stands to reason that he named the town for us. Then there's the fact that Ralsei says that it's Kris who has to seal the fountains, that their soul is inherently more special, and since deltarune lacks the distinction between soul power levels of humans and monsters so far, I think the real reason for this is because of us controlling Kris and thus being the main character. Not to mention that after Spamton Neo, a fight that draws direct parallels to Spamton's strengths in our control of Kris, Ralsei is quick to shut down Susie's concerns about what happened. Spamton was just corrupted. He turned into an ally, so don't worry about it.
Yeah.
Susie notices Kris's goosebumps and actually asks if they're okay. If you say yes, it's a strained reaction. When Susie asks Ralsei for input, he just says they look a bit shocked, but doesn't want them to worry. He doesn't want to push them and offers to make some cake. Even chocolate, their favorite, or butterscotch and cinnamon like Toriel's pies. He tries to offer to share some of his scarf, but Kris shows more interest in Susie and her jacket. Susie's antics here get Kris to smile more so than Ralsei's, and it shows a sweet and genuine friendship that she shares with Kris. Selecting no makes Kris scream, though, showing how terrified they truly are. Then, Ralsei asks if they're okay, mentions that they're yelling, and if you hugged him during the Tunnel of Love scene, he will hug Kris without even asking. He tries to be comforting, telling them not to think about what happened, then tells Kris to think about something they like, using descriptions like fluffy and soft, and even finishes by saying that he'll be there for them. It's a kind of gesture on paper, but when you consider how quick he was to deny what happened with Spamton, it's rather unfortunate all the same. It really comes across as kind of condescending and a little bit gaslighty, though at least we get some comedy at the end with Kris asking Susie for a hug instead. Upon leaving, Ralsei says he thinks everything is going to be okay. But what's interesting is that if you choose no, but didn't give Ralsei the hug, this line at the end is absent. Most of the dialogue is similar otherwise, minus any comments about hugs. What gets me here is how quickly Ralsei wants to sweep everything under the rug. How quickly he wants to distract Susie and Kris from what might really be going on, with promises of warm hugs, sweet treats, and pleasant things. Because actually confronting the problem would mean actually acknowledging us. Actually acknowledging us would break our immersion in this world. Kris would cease to be our window into the story, but a person whose body we puppeteer around. And while the process of puppeteering can bring Kris fun adventures they value, if their emotional toast to Queen is any indication, plus all the times they do goofy poses with their friends, that's only if we play nice.
Yeah. Oh god, Ralsei the Gaslighter. Again, this is bringing the whole thing of Ralsei being racist more to the forefront here. Oh, I don't like this. But this whole... I swear, I mean, the deeper you go into the deltarune iceberg, as it were, the more, like, messed up it becomes. And it gets, like, increasingly messed up exponentially quicker the more you dig down. Just, like, near the surface, like, hey, we're, like, controlling a character instead of playing as them. Or the fact that one of the characters is aware of this fact and does nothing about it. You know, it's the stuff like this. I've said it so many times. I am just so excited to see where this goes when more of the game actually gets released. Oh, and you know that with all the choices you've made in, like, previous chapters, the more you're just gonna get, like, more and more and more and more. And you know that you're only gonna get, like, things where certain dialogue choices where they only happen because you made a certain choice in chapters 1, 3, and 5. Oh, this is gonna be absolutely nuts when it comes out. Oh.
And while Ralsei encourages us to go down that pacifistic path, above all else, he wants us to keep playing the game more than he wants us to do the right thing. He wants us to be happy. He wants us to feel important. Sure, that could also extend to Kris, but with all the meta undertones of Ralsei's character, it does leave one to question how much of his affection for Kris is for their own sake versus the player, and Kris is just a proxy. Even the mere act of standing beside him and making him blush might not be because of Kris, but because of our presence puppeteering their soul. And if this is the case, it paints a rather sad light on their whole dynamic. And it's funny, because as mentioned, this only applies to Kris, and not Susie. Because Ralsei will call out when Susie misbehaves. He scolds her for not behaving like a hero, as mentioned, which temporarily drives her out of the party, and while he is friendly with her in Chapter 2, he still freaks out whenever she does things that she wants, from deciding to act without orders from Kris to dragging Ralsei off to explore the city rather than letting Kris choose who to go with or which way to walk. And you can argue his reluctance towards the R and S action is due to a desire for Kris to have something uniquely theirs, when everything down to their agency has been co-opted already. But I think even with that more charitable reading, and even with the likelihood that Ralsei does care about Kris as well, he simply puts our investment in the game before Kris's feelings. Even Ralsei's blushing occurs specifically because we're close enough that the soul cursor would be overlapping him, as Half-Bred Chaos once pointed out. And when viewed through this lens, it puts a lot about Kris and Ralsei into perspective. The reason Kris is closer to Susie, because she only sees them, and because she doesn't sugarcoat or act like their choices matter, when in their eyes, they still don't. I don't think Kris hates Ralsei either, but I do think he makes them at least a little uncomfortable, and a large part of that comes from the way Ralsei's words might come across as condescending when you consider our presence inside of them.
Yeah.
Plus, there's the whole mystery about what Ralsei is. If he is the discarded headband, as many think, and if he does represent the kind of person Kris wishes they were to fit in with monsters, that carries a ton of baggage, too. Plus, even if Ralsei's crush-like behavior is directed at us, it's still presented at Kris, which is probably extremely awkward. He's not subtle about it in the slightest. And if the festival question at the Chapter 2 ending is any indication, Kris isn't particularly interested in going with Ralsei, as they react with confusion if you select anyone besides Susie. Ultimately, though, I don't envy Ralsei. Between his solitude for however long he's existed, as well as this sheer degree of meta-knowledge he possesses, as well as his desire to make friends, but also the conflicting situation that Kris is in, there's no easy solution for how he should handle this. I also have a hunch that he might be a shadow crystal holder, which, if that is the case, that shows that he is definitely more composed than the likes of Jevil and Spampton, and yet that would certainly explain his heightened knowledge of the light world, as well as meta-elements such as the game mechanics.
Oh god, I never thought of the possibility of that. Oh, does that mean that we'd potentially have to fight Ralsei at some point? Or at the very least, probably just, you know, have to have them sacrifice themselves to give us the crystal if we actually have to use it. Wait, what are the shadow crystals even for again? Were they something you sold, or... God, it's been so long since I played.
Who knows? Perhaps he's the holder of the shadow mantle that Shaw mentioned, as it is conspicuously missing. Let me know what you think,
Oh,
though.
yeah.
There really is a lot to unpack regarding Ralsei, and this is really just an appetizer to what I hope to make a larger project sometime in the future. There's just a lot about his character I need to fully analyze, organize, and string together into a more coherent project.
I mean, I know, like, Ralsei comes off as, and most likely is, like, you know, a really gentle and nice character. But that whole thing that, like, the more you think about them, the creepier they get, that's really unsettling. And again, as Dorked said, also really sad. Because it seems like, from what we see, like, all of Ralsei's existence is somehow tied to us. Like, whether it be Kris or just, like, us, the player itself. It's really messed up, and I need answers to this so badly. So, yeah. With all that out of the way, of course, as always, the original video is linked in the description if you haven't seen it for some reason. Corner video will lead to my Let's Play of the day, and that's it for now. So I hope you guys liked. If you did, leave a like, subscribe if you have not, and I'll see you guys next time. Goodbye.